Welcome to the Jiu Jitsu Crucible podcast.
Roger doesn't lose this kind of control. He's not the guy who loses this kind of control. I think he got it. I think he's gonna get it.
Buchecha on the choke here, really close to finishing. Excuse me, Roger on the close to Buchecha. It looks very
He's gonna get it.
Join us as we talk about competition, recreational training, business development, and all things Jiu Jitsu. Strength and honor.
Strength and honor!
All right, guys, welcome to the Jiu Jitsu Crucible podcast, episode 7, titled Growing Up Gracie. I'm here with a longtime good friend of mine, All's Gracie. How you doing today?
I'm good, brother. How are you? Good to be here with you.
Awesome. So, what I generally try to do every podcast is, kind of get the guest to start from the beginning. Talk about when and where you were born and just, kind of grown up.
Well, I was born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in 1978, and I grew up there pretty much my entire life. I moved around a bit, but I was always back in Rio. But I'm trying to do the math here. I'm wondering if I'm spending more time of my life here in the U.S. now, or if I'm still at the halfway point. Because I moved here in 2003, so I've been here for 22 years now. Almost spending more time here than there, but still more Brazilian than.
So, obviously, there's no doubt anymore, you grew up in the most famous martial arts family in the history of the world. And, you have kids now.
Yes.
And, when you reflect on it, growing up in Brazil, growing up in this, what has become, this martial arts dynasty, in your opinion, how did it affect your childhood, or did it?
How did it affect my childhood? I think it affected in a positive way because I had all these role models in front of me. Growing up, I grew up wanting to be like them, and this is something that I always say. Usually, every kid, they're into comics, right? That at one point they're into superhero comics, and stuff like that. Now, entertainment industry is every kid watches YouTube. Growing up, things were limited. Every kid was reading comics, superhero comics. I was never into the superhero comics because I was living among my superheroes. So my cousins, my uncles, they were my superheroes, and I feel like I was growing up in either in the Justice League or living at the Professor X's mansion, And so I think it affected me in a very positive way. I always knew that I wanted to do what they did, what they were doing, what they do. And I think every kid, especially in Brazil, at some point they want to be like a soccer player, right? I never wanted to be a soccer player. I always knew I wanted to be a jiu-jitsu fighter, a professional fighter.
So I think one of the most common questions that is always kind of kicked around or, brought up, and I get it on some level with my son, I've done jiu-jitsu my whole life. My son, both sons, are growing up, and my oldest son is, named after Renzo, and he's very active in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And then my younger son is named after you, and how much pressure did you ever feel growing up, or was it not really a thing? Was it just part of life? Because you are going to represent this huge thing that's bigger than all of us.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. That's probably like the question that I get the most, Pat, because I think people like to think that like growing up in the Gracie family is like the Spartans, right? Like either like you're gonna be a soldier, either you're gonna be a warrior, or they throw you off the cliff, right? Or if the kid is not, it's like kind of a little bit lame and they don't, it doesn't, they see that they're not gonna be fit to be a fighter, they throw them off the cliff. As a matter of fact, I grew up like learning jiu-jitsu in a very playful way, right? Never like had a pressure to compete in an early age. I think my first competition that I ever did, I think I was 9 years old as a yellow belt. Um, and then I didn't compete until a couple years later, or when I was maybe 13 or something like that, uh, or maybe sooner. But there was never really pressure, like, and this is what I try to do with my kids, you know. I want them to play with them, I play with Ella. Let's take Ella for example here, which is the little one. Um, she's doing jiu-jitsu, but I waited for her to really ask me to go to jiu-jitsu. When she was about 3 years old, I was always playing with her at home, and then she started like, Daddy, I want to go to jiu-jitsu. And at the time, I didn't have like a 3 to 5 year old class, and I was like, no, Ella, no, I thought she was just gonna be like running around and disrupting the class and doing what she wanted to do. And she kept asking and asking, Daddy, take me to jiu-jitsu. Daddy, I want to do jiu-jitsu. Daddy, I want to do jiu-jitsu. And then I brought her to class, and she actually did like a 6 to 8 year old class at 3.5 years old, maybe. And she did awesome. She played. She definitely played, but she definitely followed the class and this and that. And she inspired me to open the 3 to 5 year old program.
So you mentioned growing up among your superheroes. So born in 78, and there was obviously a lot of these challenge fights happening with a lot of your cousins and uncles throughout the 80s, early 90s. But even when Hoist went to the UFC in 93, you're only 15 years old.
Yes.
So you talked about, again, growing up amongst the superheroes, and I imagine it changed and altered throughout your life. But like from the time you were, say, 6, 7, 8, 9 to 15, were there any of these cousins or uncles you looked up to in particular? Or how did that evolve for you?
Yeah, it's Pat. I saw, maybe get a little bit off track here. I saw the evolution of jiu-jitsu as a kid. When I was like 7, 8, 9 years old, jiu-jitsu wasn't very common in Brazil. People didn't know what jiu-jitsu was. People didn't even know how to pronounce jiu-jitsu in Brazil. It was this very like odd martial art. Had to explain what it was, and this and that. But and then we saw the boom of jiu-jitsu with like Hoist, of course. I think, and did that affect my life? I knew it. At that time I know I was only 15, but I remember when getting the news that he won. I said, man, now this is gonna be big. I remember I thought like now Hoist is set for life. So, and I wasn't wrong. But growing up, I had like a few figures that was always there with me. My uncle Helion was pretty much the main one, because I remember growing up with him. every weekend, not every weekend, but many weekends, he would grab me and my brother and would go like spend the weekend with him in his Teresopolis house, horses. I was training with him as since as an early age. He was my professor. On the weekends, we would spend the weekends together. So he molded a lot of who I am today. And my mother always made sure that we had the opportunity to have like these male figures in our lives. She was, I think it was going to be very easy for her to be either traumatized or hurt by the loss of her husband and kind of like go her own way. But she always made sure that we were provided for in every aspect of our lives, but also with jiu-jitsu. She was always said, you guys gonna have to be a black belt, and you guys gonna have to graduate in college. I was able to fulfill 50% of her wish.
Gotcha. So we'll touch on that, briefly. I lost my father, I thought, when I was young. I was 19 years old, and I went home one night, and nobody was at home, and I found my father. He had passed away. And, at 19, it was, and even today, it's, I would say, the most impactful event of my life, because that was, somewhat traumatizing on itself, going home and finding your father. You had a different path. I believe your father passed away in 83.
82.
82. So you were 4 years old.
Yeah, I was about to be 4, yes.
So, you just mentioned that your mother went above and beyond to make sure you're always provided for. You had the male role models. But now, again, we've said, you have kids. And, I guess losing your father so extraordinarily young, I don't want to say it was normal, but it's, I'm sure the most of your memory is without your dad. So how do you think that factored in to who you are and your journey? Because even your father being passed away now for over 40 years, he's still immensely popular within the jiu-jitsu community.
Yes, and that was one of the things that actually comfort us. And I say us, like I'm talking about like my mother, my brother, and myself, because my father lived among us through the memories that people had from him. There was not a single person that when they knew or discovered, oh, this is Hollis' son, like he could do. It was only great things to hear about him. What a great man he was. So that, in a way, was very comforting, right? To hear that, that I was we were part of his legacy, that we were seeds from him. So that actually helped, yes, a lot. But I'm still trying to, man, because I don't complain about my life. I think I had like a great life. I have a great life. My life keeps getting better and better. But sometimes I keep thinking like, how would it have been if he was around? Like how much different it would have been. I definitely think when it comes to like, as you said, losing a father at barely 4, not even 4, and 19, I think there's a big difference, Pat. I think like, man, this like when you're 4, when you're that so young, you don't process, things like. But when you're 19, like you're fully aware, you used to have that person in your life, and it's yeah. So yeah, and those things are like I don't really get too caught up on. I know God has a plan for all of us, Everything happens for a reason, and I just trust in his ways, and now more than ever.
So we're gonna jump around a bit, but I'm gonna ask you. You know, we've seen all these very popular, prolific Gracies. You know, and I'll use Hoyce and Horian and Hickson as an example. They all came to the U.S. relatively early. I'm just kind of curious. If your father hadn't passed away, do you think he would have ended up in the U.S.?
He had an offer to come to U.S., right? I think he would. I think probably. I'm not sure if you know 100% of the story, or just for the people who don't know that's gonna be listening. Um, an American wrestler, Bob Anderson, went to Brazil to train with my father, and they developed like I'm gonna kind of like go a little bit faster on this. They developed like a long story short. They developed a great relationship, a great friendship, and Bob decided when he went back to the U.S., he told everybody that in Brazil there was this guy who was an absolute master of his trade of jiu-jitsu, of fighting, and they wanted to, he thought they should bring him over to the U.S. to help develop martial arts, jiu-jitsu, fighting in Brazil, and possibly work with the Olympic training center in Colorado Springs. So they brought him there. My father, I don't know if he did like a sort of seminar, trial, or test, but he amazed everybody, and they offered him a position as one of the head coaches of the grappling sections, or head director. I don't know what exactly the position was, but one of the main guys there to oversee or train and the Olympic team. But when he got back, his uncle Elio Gracie told him that Horion was already in the U.S. and to send Horion there, because he needed him. If he was a champion of the family at the time in Brazil, and if he left, he wouldn't. The family would have no champion. I think at the time maybe Hickson was too young still. So yeah, I think that would have changed a lot. Like I just wondering what would have happened. But Horion went there. They said, "Yeah, man, you're good, but you're not the guy we're looking for."
Yeah. So, one thing I wanted to circle back and touch on is you were talking about how important and pivotal a person and role he had in your life, in your uncle Hillian.
Yes.
And it's funny because as really someone who's been heavily involved in jiu-jitsu for so long, and yeah, just with my level of involvement, I've always found it curious because I've had such a long-standing close relationship with you and your two brothers and Hodger from, really when you guys were young. A neat piece of trivia is the first seminar Hodger ever gave as a black belt was at my academy. Yes. In Ottawa. So I've known you guys obviously so long, and we've had a close relationship over the years. But I always wondered what your point of view is, why your uncle Helian always seemed to fly under the radar. Is that something he wanted? Like, obviously he has a big presence in Houston and South Florida, where his academies are, but he's always kind of been less known, shall we call it, than so many of your cousins and uncles. And I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, just to clarify, just like just I had more people that were very present in my life, but
Yeah.
Helium was there constantly. I had, Carlinhos provided me, a great environment to train. Gracie Barra, Renzo, embraced me like since 2003. I trained with him a little bit in Brazil too. That's how we met. We met through Renzo, but he had a great influence, especially on my no gi and MMA game, right? But Helium, going back to the Helium question, um, I think because Helium was always known to be like a very technical professor, practitioner, but I think he flies under the radar because maybe he chose the path to be more of an instructor, right? To build up his academies over competing, right? And when you're like definitely the athletes, they get more of the spotlight than the coaches, right? Well, he has a huge legacy. He has, you said Houston. He has some schools in Houston area, South Florida, but in the south of Brazil, man, it's huge. I think every time he goes to a seminar there, or the year reunions, like 1,000 plus people on the mats. He has, I don't know how many hundreds of black belts there by now. So yeah, he built a huge legacy in the south of Brazil.
So, my next question was about Rio specifically, where you were born, where you grew up. As you know, we've been to Brazil, to Rio many times together at the same time. Just, kind of coincidence and happenstance. And I don't know a lot of gringos that have spent as much time in Rio as I have. I've been there over 30 times now. And there's this interesting kind of dichotomy with Brazilians. I feel you have this one column of Brazilians that they love Brazil, and if they're from Rio, if they're cariocas, they love Rio, but they're very, very happy to be in the U.S. and they never want to go back. And then I know this other column of Brazilians, they end up coming to the U.S., they're going back to Brazil, they're back in the U.S., and they can never seem to kind of break free from Rio. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on what do you think of Rio as a city and a city that you grew up? Obviously, we hear so much about the crime and corruption, and obviously I'm there a lot and I know it exists, and I'm very careful and I be aware, and knock on wood, I've never been victim of any nefarious situation in Rio. But yeah, I just wanted you to talk about Rio and the kind of the two types of Brazilians. Because I talked to you or I talked to your wife, and she's like, and I know your wife's not from Rio, but she's like, I'm never going back to Brazil. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Uh, yeah, I'm on the column that, I'm very happy here in the US, in Florida, and then I would go to Brazil to visit. But as of now, I don't have plans to go back. Um, Man, Rio is a very interesting. I think you described better than anybody because I think you have your carioca, uh, 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 honorary
Yeah,
citizenship
yeah,
card, you know. Uh, but yeah, Rio is it described like it's like this mix of chaos and paradise and curse and blessing, and it's man, and like they said, Rio is not for amateurs. It's a rough city. I would say somebody's gonna go visit. Odds are everything's gonna be fine. But at any given moment, any given place, something bad could happen. And we've seen it
yeah,
happen. I guess there's so many people there that the odds are it might not happen with you. It might happen with
yeah,
someone else. Because it's like a 20 million People City, right? So, but things happen, things happen, and
But would you agree like it really has an allure? Like your grandmother, for example, lived her whole life in New York, but like she
every
spent
time,
half the year every year in Rio.
yeah, she would go between November and March, sometimes April. She would stay like in Rio by Ecuador Beach. She had her apartment there, walk every day, friendly with everybody. In Rio, I think you gotta know how to. You're not gonna be walking around with your iPhone like
Yeah,
like that. Somebody might snatch from you. You're not gonna walk around with like flashy watches, jewelry. I mean, you could, you know,
yeah,
but no, I wouldn't. Growing up, when I was living there, I would go to the beach. When I was ready to go to the beach, I'll put my board shorts, not even an Havaianas, barefoot,
yeah,
couple of bucks on the shorts, just to buy water or a Coke
yeah.
on water or something, and that's how we go to the beach. But yeah, no, it depends depending where you are, you're gonna have a great life there for sure, for sure. But I'm just so used to, I like space. I moved from the Northeast to Florida looking for more space,
Yeah.
something more calm. Yeah.
So, in terms of, your journey in jiu-jitsu, what age were you when you got your black belt?
I was 20, almost 23 years old. Yeah,
And
2001.
was there any breaks in your training, or did you train consistently from the time you were a child?
No, I train consistently. Um, I train, as I got older, things start to. There's a helicopter flying over here. But as I was getting older, things picked up a little bit more, right? But I was fairly consistent training, no breaks, always training, as an early
And
age, maybe 2, 3 times a week as a child.
so now take us through that transitional time. When you first came to the US to deciding to leave home, to leave Rio, and move to the US, and tell us about how that all took place.
Yeah, it was a time where Renzo, Ryan, Daniel, Rodrigo, all these guys were fighting in Pride. And Pride was just this amazing show. Um, and I wanted that. I wanted to fight in Pride. I wanted to pursue the MMA path. So I started thinking, man, I gotta go to the US. I gotta go to the US. Um, Igor, at the time, he was already in New York. He moved before me. I went to actually train and teach with my cousin Caesar in California, in the Bay Area. But after a few months, I went to New York to spend some time in New York, a few weeks in New York, and I saw, man, how everything was happening there. Guys getting ready to fight in Pride, Igor teaching. My grandma had an apartment there, had a place to stay. Easier to be more independent. You don't need a car for anything. Um, and I said, and Hansel said, man, I think if you want to fight in Pride, if you want to pursue the MMA path, you got to be here. So I actually never went back to to California. I said, man, Caesar, we're going to stay. I'm going to stay here. I asked Hansel, just talk to Caesar, ask him, Renzo talked to him. I talked to him and stayed in New York and teaching Renzo's, um, competing for, at one point the UFC bought Pride and closed it. So it was a very sad point in my life because I thought I was gonna be able to fight in Pride, and but anyway, things were end up taking a different turn. But I
How
I did what I wanted to do.
so? How did the connection form? And like, what was the role that Renzo had in your life?
Renzo was always around, right? I always knew. It's not that some for people who thinks here doesn't think I met Renzo then. No, Renzo was always around. I always knew Renzo from being a kid. I remember going to my aunt's house, my uncle's house, hanging out with them, seeing Renzo around, Ryan, Half, all of them. Um, when Helium moved to the south of Brazil, I was training with Renzo. Um, and he was teaching in the mornings by my house in Rio. He was teaching in the equestrian club there, and I was going in the morning. I think it was Tuesdays and Thursdays in the morning, or Monday, Wednesday in the morning, something like that. And then at nighttime, I would go to Gracie Barra and catch a ride with him, and he would drop us. He would drop us at home. So I was constantly with him, and then eventually he moved back to the U.S. And then I stayed a little bit orphan, without professor. Going to Gracie Barra wasn't that easy. Helium was in the south of Brazil. Then I started going training a little bit with at Carlson School until Helium decided to. No, I'm sorry, that wasn't it. When Helium moved to Brazil, to South, I started training a bit with at Carlson when I was 13. And then when Renzo moved back to the U.S., Helium invited me to go live with him in the south of Brazil. Then I stayed there a couple of years. My jiu-jitsu made a huge boom until purple belt. Then I moved to the U.S., moved back to Rio. Then I was living at Gracie Barra, living next to Gracie Barra and training at Gracie Barra for a long time, a couple of years. Then I decided to, after a while, that's when I moved to New York, to the U.S. Sorry. And yeah, and then how we met. We did a seminar there with you.
Yeah, crazy seminar. Yeah, we'll probably, this is a PG podcast, so we'll leave that seminar out.
Yeah.
In regards to, you mentioned you went and trained at Carlson's Academy briefly.
Uh-huh.
This is another, for whatever reason, it's a huge topic of interest among people. And being a Gracie, I'm sure you know this, but growing up in Rio, it seems, from the outsider, there was always a bit of division or separation in the family. Like you had Elio's group, you had Carlinos and his group, you had Carlson, over in Copacabana. And can you just, was the family separate? Was it divided? Was there ever these weekends at Elio's ranch? Or can you just kind of, from a kid growing up in Rio, can you kind of speak to that and make the listeners kind of just give them some idea of what that was like?
Yeah, I remember. It was a very, not only among the family, but rivalry was huge. It was a time there, like when you train at one academy, if you go train at another academy, you get kicked out of the academy. You get beat up, and then you get kicked out if you keep like cross training. You know, there's no such thing as cross training. Cross training today is very popular, but back then, cross training is a good way to get you hurt and get you kicked out of your own academy. I think trying to think here, for example, because I started to realize that as I grew, because we had, like I said, my mother really provided for us, right? She had, out of a sudden, she had to take care of like two kids. Uh, she had another son, Gregor, and she was a warrior. She always provided. So she either like had to work, and she had to work a lot. So in order for us to do things, right, to go train or to go, do other things, take English classes, swimming classes. She had a take us to school. She had like a driver driving us around, right? Now I understand that. Growing up, I didn't understand, how big deal that is, but now I know what a huge deal that was, what sacrifice, what tolls it took on her. But we had a driver driving us around to train him, and when I changed to start training at Carlson, in my car, we had like a Gracie Barra sticker, the Tasmanian Devil sticker, the old school, and every time
Yeah.
the driver would come or drop us off or pick us up, I remember the guys, man, what's up with that? What's up with that the sticker in your car? But I think I was 13 at the time. I wasn't really 12, 13. I wasn't really aware of this rivalry. And then I started to understand that, I was like, my friends train there. I used to train there. That's like, where I was going. It's because like Baja was very far from where I lived, and it would take forever to get there with traffic. So my mother said, you guys are not be going to Baja anymore. You guys are going to go to train at your Uncle Carlson School, which he had an academy in the same building as my father. Together, but separate, but together. So we started going there. It was a good time, we trained there. But then later on, when I went back to Baja, I started to see like the rivalry between because Carlson students, Carlson Academy, were really tough guys, and they had a big rivalry with Gracie Baja. Like that was probably like the first big rivalry. Before Alliance formed. This is before Nova Union formed. So it was a big rivalry between the Gracie Barra guys and the Carlson guys. Usually they had the better, heavier guys, and or they not the better, but they have they would get they'll have tougher, heavier guys, and then as far as I remember, the lighter guys were better at Gracie Barra. But it was rivalry big time. And then among the family, I never realized that until later on, too, But I think the Carlson situation, I want to touch on that because I think we gotta be fair about things. And as a kid, I used to see, Carlson. He was a man. He never wanted to lose anything. He is like, man. He wanted his students. He gave everything for his students, right? He was always like, Brazil soccer is a big culture, so we have people tend to be like, this soccer rival trust goes everywhere, and in jiu-jitsu wasn't different. So Carlson had the same mentality of like, pushing his students, defending their students verbally, like something. Now even like we have like video assistant referee in jiu-jitsu. Back then it was like none of that, So there was always arguments about referees. So we see always Carlson there complaining, and people arguing about decisions of the referees and this and that. So I always see Carlson there, and I couldn't understand why his academy was fighting against my other uncle's academy, and I started to see like how passionate he was about it. It's kind of me like, "Man, why is he like that?" I didn't start, man, why is he doing these things? You know, why is he kind of like, but growing up, as I grew up, now I understand that it was probably really tough for him to because he played a major role in history. We don't know what would have happened if he didn't beat Valdemar Santana, the guy who beat Helio Gracie, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that caused something in the family because I don't know if Helio knew how to handle that.
Gotcha.
So I think Carlson felt pushed aside, went doing his own thing. But yeah, but that's what I think it happened. I cannot say for sure, but that's just my impression. But I admire Carlson a lot more than what I should have when he was alive. I know he played a very important role in the history. He's like a major player in the history of Jiu-Jitsu. And for everybody, not just for the family, for everybody. For everybody.
Yeah, I mean, he had guys, UFC champions, Bustamante, Belfort, like very obviously impactful instructor.
Yes.
So one thing I want to touch on is I know you, unlike so many higher profile people in jiu-jitsu, you've been able to really, you grew up in Brazil, you competed, you did some MMA, but then, you transitioned into a professor and a school owner, and you've had such, great success in that realm. But, you come from a family where not everybody in your family has that level of success of academy ownership that you do. And you certainly know there's a ton of great black belts with a high level of jiu-jitsu. And they just can't make it work. Like, it was kind of a big deal in the community about a month and a half ago. Nino Schembri put out a post he had to close his academy.
Yeah.
And, he was very, very popular for having great jiu-jitsu. So what do you think it was in your evolution that you were able to kind of switch gears and understand the massive importance of having a successful business?
I think like it's forced to eat. There are a lot of things, Pat. To be honest, I don't think there's like one thing, right? But let's just start here with the mentality of like you touched of shifting gears, right? When I decided to start my own academy in 2017, that was the moment that I said, okay, I competed in jiu-jitsu, I competed in judo, I competed in gi, no gi, I did MMA, I even did pro wrestling. I wrestling, right? I compete in high level wrestling. I did it all. Was I the best of all? No, but I competed all. So I racked a bunch of experience there. When I decided to open my academy, I knew, and I still know, that in order for me to have a successful academy, not just as a business, because your business is going to be successful if you have you can tell your business based on your students, right? Not just people only think about numbers of students, but people tend to forget the quality of the students, right? And one of the things that, and if you see the reviews on my schools, that people talk a lot about the environment, the environment, the environment, the environment, the environment. But we, and I want to say we because I don't do this alone, right? I have a team that do this with me. But going back to 2017, when I decided to open my academy, I knew I needed to shift gears from being a competitor to be a professor, to grow, to give. I went from taking now to 100% giving, right? Because to be an athlete, you need to be somewhat selfish. And I don't see this in a negative way. You have to, if you want to perform at the highest level, you have to. So to me, I was like, man, I'm going to open an academy. I'm going to have classes all day. I need to be there. I need to focus on my students. I need to shift gears and focus the attention. Now it's them, not me. And I'm finally happy with this. A lot of the times, either my brothers or friends, and they say, Hollis, you got to go back to compete. Sometimes even students, you got to go back to compete. You're going to do really well in the worlds, master worlds, this and that. I said, man, maybe. But for now, I'm fine with what I did. I just want to focus on keep giving the best type of kind of jiu-jitsu to my students, to my team. And that's how my mentality is when on being a school owner, when it comes to the mindset of shifting gears from competitor to athlete, competitor to professor, manager.
So all these, great black belts that come to the U.S. and they hit a series of stumbling blocks. Do you think, and I'm not talking about any one specific person like Nino, but I'm thinking, do you think they fail to switch gears and make it all about the students? Because everybody has their different struggles, and I look at a lot of these different schools, and one thing I think that unfortunately some Brazilians struggle with is you have great English. You're fully fluent. A lot of the guys that come, they have this bubble of people that their life is, and it's all Brazilians, and they only speak Portuguese. And, one thing that I really admire about the Mendes brothers at Art of Jiu-Jitsu is they have a real insistence that all their students learn English well and properly. But, what do you think the stumbling blocks are? Because even you, Igor, you two are great examples of, yes, you're brothers and you came to the U.S., but you guys are doing really well on the academy ownership side, where so many people of your generation are still struggling.
Yeah, Pat. I think the mentality of being there 100% for the students, it's important. Okay, and people don't want to do that. People want to do what's easy. People want to do jiu-jitsu, and I'm gonna be a little bit controversial here, and I'm not telling any specific name, but people need to drop their ego. People need to drop that, I'm Mr. Hot Shot. Okay? How many times after teaching a seminar, people tell me, this was the best seminar our school ever had? Was I the most famous guy that went there? No. Was I the most accomplished guy that was ever there? No. But when I go teach a seminar or a class in my academy, or when I design and I develop a curriculum for my academies, I only have one thing in mind. Is this gonna be good for the people who are taking the class or the seminar? I'm not here to show off how great my skills are, how much, how can I do these crazy flashy moves. I'm here to break this down in a way where anybody can do it. And that's my mission as a professor. How can I'm gonna make this class great for every single person in this room? Every class I teach, I don't go through motions. I teach, and I'm already thinking, how am I gonna make this class better next time? When the curriculum revolves around, how is this class gonna be better next time I'm teaching this class again? And sometimes it's from a 6 a.m. class to a 6 p.m. class. I'm already making adjustments to make it better, right? And what does it makes it better? You gotta have better communication skills. Yes, the Americans or whatever you are, people understand this is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and they are very patient and understandable if you have an accent, right? If you have some communication issues when it comes to teaching, right? People, understand. They actually, I think that's, and as a matter of fact, this is still, we have great American instructors, don't get me wrong, have great, but I think that's still, it's almost like if you were gonna learn Thai boxing from a Thai, then over a gringo, right? Or jiu-jitsu from a Brazilian, then an American. Are all Brazilians better than non-Americans? Absolutely not. They have a lot of Americans. I don't want people to take this out of context. How does it say the Brazilians are, better? No, I'm not. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that probably right now, the better jiu-jitsu is in the U.S. It's not in Brazil anymore. Okay? But the Brazilians still have this factor of, because the name is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and you're learning from Brazilian, that might give them an edge. But that doesn't hold. You know what I mean? That won't hold if you're not looking to give your student the best experience, if you're not doing like an English course or, getting out of your bubble and only speaking with Brazilians and not improving your English, right? This is really important. If you want to be successful as a professor, as an instructor, you need to speak the language that you are, the place that you are. If you teach in China, guess what? You're going to have to learn Chinese. If you're in Korea, you're going to have to learn Korean. If you're in Greece, you're going to have to learn Greek. If you're in Finland, you're going to have to learn Finnish, which is really hard.
Yeah.
So that's what I have to do.
So
yes, go ahead.
I got 3 questions. We're coming up on, I try to keep the podcast to an hour. So the first question I'm going to ask you might be sick of hearing it, because I just assume you've heard it a lot, but I don't know. But I know it's a question I get asked a lot, and I don't really know how to answer it, because people know who I've had at my academy many times over the years, and people know, who I have close relationships, like you and your brothers and Renzo and Hodger. And the question's about Hodger. In your opinion, because you've known him since he's a small child.
Yes.
What made him different?
What made Hodger different? I remember one time, Pat, when people ask you, like you were in the consulting business, right? If you ask me, what makes your academy good? What's the one thing that makes the academy, be successful? Like, man, there's not a one thing. There's a lot of things, right? But I think with Hodger is his will. He wanted his will, his heart, and his ethics. I think that's what makes him what he is, what made him to achieve. He's a hard worker. He pays attention to details. he put his foot where his mouth is, right?
Yeah.
And that what makes him different. He trains a lot. He trains more than anybody else. And yeah, I think that's what makes. And he doesn't. And he sticks to what it works, to what's efficient.
Awesome. Now, this might be a hard question. I don't know. But I'm always interacting with so many Brazilians because, you know, I'm there, as I said, several times a year. Brazilian Nationals in Sao Paulo, and I'm in Rio. If you are going to talk to a Brazilian and they do jiu-jitsu and they want to come to the U.S. and they want to make a living in jiu-jitsu, what would your top 3 pieces of advice for them be?
Learn English.
Yeah.
Learn English. Understand what kind of people you want to teach. You want to teach competitors? Do you want to teach the average day warrior? Right? What do you want? Who you catering to? And 3, when you leave Brazil, leave Brazil. Look ahead. Don't be just thinking like, oh, but here I don't have my feijoada. Oh, but here I don't have my beach. Oh, but here I don't have whatever. Set your eyes ahead. Set what lies ahead of you, not what's behind.
So, last question. Just wanted you to give me your thoughts. Because, you know, I grew up Catholic, and, you know, I've said several times on the podcast, I spend so much time in Brazil. Mm-hmm. And coincidentally, you know, there's more Catholics in Brazil than any other country in the world. Yes. Very Catholic country. You're wearing a shirt right now, you know, Jesus is King. And I don't want to say, and I'll let you speak to it, but I know recently you have become more involved in your faith. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I saw you put a Facebook post out the last couple months and you were talking about it. But I just wanted you to, you know, touch on that because, you know, for me, I think it's very, very popular the world over. It's obviously very, very popular in jiu-jitsu. You know, for me, my journey is my own, and I think everyone's is their own. But, yeah, you know, the shirt, and I know you've had this recent, as I said, kind of, you know, you've become more public about it. And I just wanted you to talk about that for a couple of minutes.
Yes. What we call, I'm going to talk about my 2-minute miracle, right? Here, because the podcast, I might be able to extend it a little bit more, but
we can extend it a few minutes. Don't worry.
No, but like I grew up, as you said, right? Brazil's a heavy Catholic country, right? I studied in a Catholic school. I went to masses. I was baptized in the Catholic Church when I was 15. My mother's Catholic. But I think as a kid, as a teenager, I never really understand the church. I never, you know, I don't remember one time that to me, like every time I went to church, I couldn't understand a single word that the priest was saying. It didn't really connect with me. It didn't really make sense to me. To me, as growing up as a kid, that was it's only about rules and, you know, tradition. And to me, I was like, man, what does this affect in my life, right? My family, they are cardicists from the spiritual. A lot of people in my family, they believe in spiritism. I don't know if I'm giving the right translation, but like from Allan Kardec, which he was believing in talking that the spirits of the dead are around, and they believe in reincarnation and all that, right? Karma and all this type of stuff. That kind of like made some sense to me as a kid. I never practiced anything again. I was never into like any religion, right? I hear stories of them saying about these things, and I lived life on my own. Thinking I wasn't sure if God existed or not, but in case He did, me being like a good person, I was able to get into heaven even if it was from the back door. You know what I mean? Okay, I'm just gonna do good, and if the moment I punch my ticket, I die because I was a good person. God's gonna open the back door of heaven. Goes, come on, boy, come on in, squeeze in here. You know, don't let anybody know. And that's how I went living my life. You know, for a long time. One day, after we moved here to Florida, my wife and I, we are both, and we live, you know, she had the same beliefs as I did. We were both thinking about the possibility of God. Her for her reasons, me, I was mostly like, man, this world is crazy. You know, what's going on? This can be, you know, people like are going crazy, values are changing, you know, what's right becomes frowned upon, what's wrong becomes applauded. What kind of world my daughter, you know, my little daughter, my kids are going to grow up in? So I started contemplating, like, man, I'm going to put her in a Christian school, Catholic school, you know, even though I don't necessarily believe in religion. I don't know if I believe in God or not. I should put her in those schools so she can have some morals and values, right? So, and one day I arrived home, and my wife and I would start talking about it, you know, the possibility of God. And we had like a quick brainstorm session about if God existed or not. And at the end of it, we came out in agreement that, yeah, God's very plausible. And if God exists, everything about Jesus is possible. You know, being born of a virgin, died, resurrected, you know, and all that stuff is very possible. And I kid you not, Pat, the very next day, Ella had a play date, and the mother of her friend invited us to go to church the next day. We were having the conversation Friday, the play date happened Saturday, and then she invited us to go to church on Sunday. To me, you know, like, this is not a coincidence. We went to church, which is like 3 minutes from 3 to 5 minutes from our academy, from my house. Depends if we run into a red light or not. We went there. It was amazing. It was everything. I don't know what I was expecting, but it was a great feeling. The message was right. We went back ever since. Every Sunday we're there. We jumped in on their discipleship program. We got baptized. Now we're very involved in the church. And what I can say is, like, Jesus rocked our world. Our life was, like I said before, our life was always great. I never had problems with, anything. My marriage was good, but now everything is so much better. When I thought things couldn't get better, everything's so much better with Jesus.
Well, that's awesome. And obviously we have a jiu-jitsu podcast, not a religion podcast, and I do think everyone's journey is that. I think it's their own, but someone who goes to church, who goes to mass in Baja, you know, I'm super excited that, you know, you have had this, you know, journey for yourself. And yeah, I encourage everyone to, you know, find their own journey, what works for them. But Hollis, thanks so much for the time. And I'm going to be looking to get your brothers on here. I'm going to get Hodger on here. And, you know, I think you came from such a, you talk about a crazy place. You know, you come from Rio, and you're part of a family that has changed really the landscape of martial arts. And it's difficult to quantify how many lives your family has changed. It's very, very difficult to quantify. And I would say, for my 2 cents, we talk about just being a good person and paying it forward, and you know, recognizing the people that came before us. You know, just from me, you know, I want to thank you and your entire family, because I wouldn't be where I am in life without the Gracie family. So, you know, I just want to basically be able to shed some positivity on the contributions you and your family have made to Jiu-Jitsu.
Thank you, Pat. You know, it was a pleasure talking to you once again. You know, everybody needs to know that we are like good friends, great friends, more than good friends. We've been friends for 20-something years now. And I'm so happy that to see where you are too. And yeah, thank you for everything that you do in our lives too, you know. Yes.
All right. Thanks, Hollis. Till
you.
next time.
Till next time, brother.
You've been listening to the Jiu-Jitsu Crucible podcast. Stay sharp, stay humble, and train hard.